Good evening friends. Today I am going to explain the osteology of radius and ulna. Okay, coming to the radius. So this is upper end. Okay, this is upper end which is round. Okay, and lower end is flat. You can identify this is flat and this is round. So there is a medial border which is sharpest. You can see this sharpest border. This should be medial side. And one last feature that determines the side of bone is dorsal tubercle of Lister. Dorsal tubercle. Dorsal means it should be on posterior side. Here you can see this tubercle. This is dorsal tubercle of Lister, which should be placed dorsally. So if you place dorsally, and this should be medial side. If you place here, this also can be medial side. Okay, here, but the dorsal tubercle is coming anterior. That is ventral. It should not happen. It should be dorsally, and this sharp border should be medially. This should be upper end. This is lower end. This is left radius. Okay. Now coming to the upper end. Upper end is round. Okay. It is round and it is encircled by the ligament called annular ligament, and upper end gets this fossa gets attached with the humerus, that is capitulum of the humerus. It's get attached. Okay, down to the upper end there is a constricted neck. Okay, constricted neck, and here you can see we keep in anatomical position. This part is called, this is radial tuberosity. Okay, this is radial tuberosity. Now coming to the lower end. Lower end, if we keep like this I said the medial side. Okay, this is lateral. At the lower and lateral you can see an elevation here. This elevation is called as, what is this? Styloid process of radius. This is called styloid process of radius. And medial side, this is lateral. Okay, medial side you can see there is an ulnar notch of radius where head of the ulna gets attached. This is the ulnar notch of radius. Okay, now dorsally, as I said, there is a dorsal tubercle of Lister. Okay, dorsal tubercle of Lister. Now coming to the borders, from the radial tuberosity, oblique line goes and joins with the anterior border of the styloid process. Anterior border of styloid process. This is anterior border. From the radial tuberosity, oblique line goes and joins with the anterior border of styloid process. This is anterior border of radius. And posterior is the mirror image. If you turn like this, from the radius it goes obliquely and joins with the dorsal tubercle of Lister. Okay, this is the from the radial tuberosity, it goes obliquely and joins with the dorsal tubercle of Lister. This is the posterior border. And another is the intraosseous border. This is sharp border or medial, also called as medial border. Okay, it is also from the radial tuberosity and till the it goes till the posterior margin of the which ulnar notch of radius. From here it goes here straight and till the posterior margin of the ulnar notch of the radius. This was anterior border of ulnar or anterior margin of ulnar notch of radius. This is posteriorly. Intraosseous border goes from the radial tuberosity and joins to the posterior margin of ulnar notch of radius. Okay, now we can divide into surfaces. This is anterior surface, posterior surface, and here only border will be present. This is what lateral surface, anterior surface, posterior surface, and lateral surface. Okay, now coming to the next, that is ulna. These are the general features of radius, Attachments I will discuss later along with the ulna. Coming to the ulna, general features and sign determination. So ulna, as we saw here, radius the head was above. Here this is not the head. This is not the head. Here this round part is called head of ulna. Okay, and this this is called upper end. This is lower end, but head is below in the lower end. Now coming to the upper end, you can see this part. This part. This part is called olecron process. Olecranon process. Okay, and this part down is called coronoid process. This is olecron, and this is coronoid. Coronoid, olecron. Okay. Next, here laterally you can see this. Think it is visible here. Somewhat depressed fossa. This is called as a radial notch of ulna, where head of the radius gets attached here, like this. See, head of the radius get attached to this process, like this. Okay, so this is called a radial notch of ulna. Okay, now coming to the lower end. Lower end, you can see here this elevation here. This is called styloid process, which is posterior and medial, somewhat medial and posterior. Okay, and you can see the sharp border. It should be placed laterally. Here, sharp border. It should be placed laterally, and this should be somewhat medially. This styloid process. So this is also of left ulna. Okay. Now, next, in the upper end, coming to the features. This is called olecranon process, as I said. Okay, it contains a superior surface. This is superior surface. This is posterior surface, and if we keep like this, okay, if we keep like this is medial border, medial surface, and this should be lateral surface of what olecranon process. And next, posterior surface of olecranon process is subcutaneous and like triangular in shape. You can see here. It is subcutaneous and somewhat triangle in shape. Okay. Now, coming to the coronoid process, it also contains superior surface. Here, superior surface, antero-inferior surface. Okay, which continues as the ulnar tuberosity. This is ulnar tuberosity. Antero-inferior surface. Again, same lateral surface. Lateral surface which gives rise to the radial notch of ulna, and medial surface. Okay, medial surface. Now, below this ulnar notch of radial notch of ulna, below this, you can see a crust, somewhat ridge crust like structure. This is called a supinator crust. Okay. Now, next, borders. As we saw in the radius, similarly we contain this is anterior border, posterior border, and here this is lateral border. There we saw medial border, here lateral border, and divides into three surfaces, that is anterior surface, posterior surface, and the medial surface. As this interosseous is a lateral border, it does not contain surface. Surface is medial. In the radius we had a lateral surface, but medial border. Here medial surface but lateral border. Okay. Now next, coming to the attachments. So attachments we must learn together. So if you see, this is the head of the radius, gets attached to the radial notch of ulna, and this is ulnar notch of radius, where head of the ulna gets attached. So if this is the position. holding is somewhat difficult, but I manage it. So we can keep like this. Okay, this is the position. Now here you can see the, this is what I said. This is radial tuberosity, right? Radial tuberosity, posterior surface here. Posterior surface, you can get the insertion of biceps brachii here. Okay, biceps brachii, and ulnar tuberosity, which is ulnar tuberosity below this antero-inferior surface. I said here, continuation of the ulnar tuberosity. Here you get attachment of the antero-inferior surface of coronary process. This is coronary process. This is superior surface. This is superior. Here it is antero-inferior surface, continuation of the ulnar tuberosity. Here you get insertion of brachialis. Okay, this is anterior part. Coming to the posterior, if you rotate, okay, here you can see below this head of the radius gets attached to the radial notch of ulna. Below that I said there is a supinator crust, right? So there we get the origin of the supinator muscle here inside supinator muscle. Okay, and it gets inserted to the radius. So here lateral, this is medial surface. Okay, this interosseous is medial surface, medial border, right? So it radius contains lateral surface. So lateral surface upper end, this part, lateral surface upper end, here there is insertion of supinator. Supinator comes from the origin of the supinator crust and gets inserted to the lateral surface of upper end of the radius, this part. Okay, now below this lateral surface here, somewhat here up below, there is an insertion of pronator teres here. Pronator teres comes from the medial epicondyle. Okay, medial, from here somewhere humerus get attached here. From medial epicondyle, it comes like this and inserted into the lateral surface of the radius below the insertion of the supinator. Supinator gets inserted here. Below that insertion, there is insertion of pronator teres. Okay, now in the upper end, okay, coming to the anterior surface again. Okay, here, what is this olecranon process? This is superior surface. Superior surface, there is an insertion of, what is the insertion? Triceps muscle. Okay, triceps muscle get inserted in the superior surface of olecranon process. Now radius anterior border. See, this is radius, right? Wait. So here anterior border, I said the oblique line goes here. So here anterior border oblique line goes here and gets attached to the what? Gets attached to the anterior margin of the stellate process. So from the oblique line, not the anterior border, from the oblique line, there is an origin of the flexor digitorum superficialis. Flexor digitorum superficialis, and rest of the anterior surface, you can see the origin of the flexor pollicis longus. Rest of the anterior surface, only the oblique line gets attachment of the flexor digitorum superficialis. Rest all anterior surface gets the origin of the flexor pollicis longus. Okay, now anterior in the ulna, you can see here anteromedial surface. Anteromedial surface. Anterior and plus medial, there is an origin of the flexor digitorum profundus. Anterior and medial surface, both, there is an origin of flexor digitorum profundus. In the lower part, if you come here, from the ulna, lower 1/4 of ulna, there is an origin of the pronator quadratus, anterior surface only, and the origin of the pronator quadratus, and gets inserted to the radius here only, lower 1/4 of the anterior surface. Here, lower 1/4 of the anterior surface of ulna, there is an origin of the pronator quadratus, and lower 1/4 of the anterior surface of the radius, there is an insertion of the pronator quadratus. From here, it gets inserted to here, somewhat like this. Pronator quadratus. Okay. Now, posterior surface. Okay, posterior surface here, somewhat difficult to hold. Okay, here you can see there is an oblique line in the ulna. Here there is an oblique line, and from here there is a vertical line going in the posterior surface of ulna. I think you can see this vertical line. From here there is an oblique line. Okay, this oblique line divides the ulna into upper and lower part. Okay, upper part, here there is an insertion of anconeus muscle, upper part, anconeus. So now this oblique line divides into upper and lower part of ulna. This vertical part divides into, which is this border. Here in ulna there is a medial surface, right? This is lateral. So this is medial surface and medial part and lateral part. Okay, medial part and lateral part. Okay, now from the lateral part, from both this is lateral part of ulna. Okay, here, from here and here, there are muscles origin. We'll discuss. Okay, okay. So from here, there is an origin of the abductor pollicis longus. Okay, this is abductor pollicis longus here. Okay, I said here oblique line, upper and lower part, and from vertical line, this is uh, lateral part and medial part. Okay, from the lateral part, I am saying here the origin of abductor pollicis longus. Here also abductor pollicis longus, abductor pollicis longus. Below this, there is an in the ulna extensor pollicis longus, and here there is extensor pollicis brevis, and again in ulna extensor indicis here. First is from both sides, that is abductor pollicis longus, and only from below that, only from ulna, that is extensor pollicis longus. Below that, in the radius, only in the radius, extensor pollicis brevis, and below that, only in the ulna, here lateral part, extensor indicis. Okay, and lateral side is over, but medial side there is no insertion or nothing. It is subcutaneous in the ulna. Okay, thank you. Hope you understood.